Great afternoon, everyone. We are excited to be together one more time for our AME Freedom Summer School. We have another exciting lesson by another tremendously gifted and talented member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church with us today, Dr. Claire Crawford, who will be teaching our lesson today. Serves as the Assistant Professor of Africana Political Thought in the Department of Politics and International Affairs in the Program of African American Studies at Wake Forest University. She holds a BA in International Affairs and Africana Studies from George Washington University, a school I like, in MA in Conflict Resolution from Georgetown University, another school I like. I don't just like half graduated from, and a Ph.D. in Political Science and International Relations from the University of Southern California. Her scholarship focuses on Black political thought, sound, and politics, social movements, and political identity formation, exploring how power and freedom shape the political lives of Black communities. She is writing a book entitled So the Devil Doesn't Hear You, Southern Black Rural Political Existence as the Otherwise, a sonic exploration of Southern Black political life and democratic theory. She is the bomb. She is about to take us in today. If you would join me in welcoming Dr. Claire Crawford. We are in your hands.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So glad to be with you all this evening, and just grateful to be here. First, recognizing both my mom and my father, Dr. Cheryl Crawford and Dr. Marvin L. Crawford, and the 6th District, for which gave me so much of the fuel from which we're about to hear about today. And so this journey that I'm going to take us on, I will share my screen as well here. Let's see, make sure we did that. All right. Okay. And so the journey that I'm taking us on will focus on this broader idea of power and global solidarity. And so again, I'm assistant professor at Wake Forest University, and my focus is often on Black freedom and how do we think through it, how do we consider it, who is a part of it, and how do we continue that on till today. And so scripture-wise, the Freedom School focused on now the whole group of those who believer of one in heart and soul. No one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. Acts 4:32. As a professor and just like a civic scholar, I always like to invite people into what we're about to get into as listeners. And so the way that I think about my teaching and also my involvement in the world is through a concept called otherwiseness, kind of framed through a scholar, Sean Crawley at UVA. And the way I think of teaching is we come witness together, we roll through, thank you for being here. We come undone, learning is a process of undoing. And then we believe, because as Black folks, we come together and believe in something greater, we join in, we celebrate. And so for the next 40 minutes or so, I invite you to flow with me. When we get into this idea, the questions sort of guiding my talk tonight are: what is power? What is global solidarity? And how can we be in solidarity with and act on our power together? First, starting back, I know the kind of time period for the Freedom School today started in 1968, but just taking a couple months back and going back to MLK's "Where Do We Go From Here" speech at the SCLC conference on August 16th, 1967, and just drawing attention to a couple things, particularly in the middle of this speech. He gets into what is love really, and like how do we identify love and power. So just drawing on a couple of things, particularly the second paragraph. And he says what is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. And power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And of course, when we get into the idea of 1968, it is often considered the year America unraveled, or the year of anger, particularly in the United States. It is framed through the urban riots, the rise of language of Black militancy is taking hold in the country. There's also the rise of like Black arts movements. We started seeing some more plays and actual writing, and the visual artists are kind of taking seat also at the same time. This is also the time at the Mexico Olympics where we have the three brothers who raise their fists. And so we have this like movement of like Black power into this global stage. And so first, kind of addressing this question of what is Black power? Why is this something we should pay attention to here? Taking particularly these words from Stokely Carmichael, by this point, Kwame Ture, Black Power, in his book, Black Power, he says the adoption of the concept of Black power is one of the most legitimate and healthy developments in American politics and race relations in our time. It is a call for Black people in this country to unite, to recognize their heritage, to build a sense of community. It is a call for Black people to begin to define their own goals, to lead their own organizations and to support those organizations. It is a call to reject the racist institutions and values of the society. The concept of Black power rests on a fundamental premise. Before a group can enter the open society, it must first close ranks. By this, we mean group solidarity is necessary before a group can operate effectively from a bargaining position of strength in a pluralistic society. And so we know now a lot of times the mainstream media frames the concept of Black power as something violent, something to not move towards. But even grounding it more, where does Stokely come up with this concept of Black power? And if you notice, it's a little blurred, but this picture in the bottom, the larger one where it says vote November 8th, broadly it says Lowndes County, and we're talking about Lowndes County, Alabama. And so 1965, particularly, Lowndes County Freedom Organization forms, and the image that they used to start the organization was the Black Panther. And so it's there in his journey, particularly with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that he first hears of what becomes his way of moving forward in Black power. And so it's amongst these rural Black folks where he gains that understanding of what it means to work together, solidarity, what is sort of like life. These things that we inherently know are emerging from the journey of Black life, particularly over the last couple of weeks in Freedom School, just thinking about from Reconstruction forward, what do you do when you're no longer considered a citizen, when your humanity isn't being recognized? You keep going, you move forward. And so in this is where Black power comes from, this self-determination, this choice to continue forward. And so Black power really is about, I recognize you as another Black person who needs to survive, and I want you to survive. And if that means in order for me to survive, then we need to come together and do something, which is sort of like the basic level of solidarity and Black solidarity. But just to keep going just a little bit more, when we think about Black power, we often attribute it directly to the Black Panther Party, which of course Stokely becomes one of the members and one of their ministers. And so he kind of leads them in the thought of Black power. And so what he kind of goes forth and says, he kind of helps them in 1966. One of the bigger things that we often leave out, because the Black Panther Party is known for their use of guns, the way that they looked, the larger part of the party emerges in Oakland, but we are now paying attention to other parts and moments of the party, particularly in like Winston-Salem, where I live. There was a documentary that came out maybe a couple months ago, early in the summer, where they were looking at the Black Panther Party that still kind of exists here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And so just to get into a little bit, one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that they did have a party platform and program. You can find videos of some of the original members explaining it, but I will read through some of it that I think it is important to clarify. So they had 10-point program is often what it is called. It was written October 15th, 1966. And so what they say first is we want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black community. And so when they say that, they say we believe that Black people will not be free until we're able to determine our destiny. 2, we want full employment for our people. We believe that the federal government is responsible and obligated to give every man employment or guaranteed income. We believe that if white American businessmen will not get full employment, then the means of production should be taken from the businessmen and placed in the community so that the people of the community can organize and employ all of its people and give a high standard of living. Three, we want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our Black community. We believe that this racist government has robbed us, and now we are demanding the overdue debt of 40 acres and 2 mules. 40 acres and 2 mules were promised 100 years ago as restitution for slave labor and mass murder of Black people. We will accept the payment in currency, which will be distributed to our many communities. And then four, we want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. We believe that if the white landlords will not give decent housing to our Black community, then the housing and the land should be made into cooperatives so that our community with government aid can build and make decent housing for its people. Five, we want education for our people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches our true history and our role in the present day society. Six, we want all Black men to be exempt from military service. Seven, we want an immediate end to the police brutality and the murder of Black people. Eight, we want freedom for all Black men held in federal, state, county, and city prisons and jails. Nine, we want all Black people, when brought to trial, to be tried in the court by a jury of their peer group or people from their Black communities as defined by the Constitution of the United States. 10, we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. And then sometimes we don't say the last part, but it's words that we know and words that are being celebrated right now. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it or to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing this power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate these governments. And he goes on to say more from the original document that America is celebrating 250 years of, Declaration of Independence. And so one thing that we can take from it, we really look at the Black Panther Party, they were essentially, yes, creating a Black state is what they were looking for, but only because they found the United States to be insufficient in its care for the Black community and Black citizenship, and possibly not really fulfilling its own words. And so even just thinking about how you're thinking of where does Black folks fit in this 250 years of the United States? Well, oftentimes there's documents like these across time, these manifestos, these programs, these declarations that are changing the way under which American words actually have meaning and take place. And oftentimes you could say, I would say, Black Panther Party actually took it seriously when they said, we the people. And so just really holding that and thinking about that. But also tonight, really crossing over at the same time, in the United States, yes, we have the 60s and it's a strong period of change, but the 60s is also a strong period of change in South Africa. And so starting tonight, in a similar vein, an individual who had a lot of things to say and a lot of the hold on particularly young South African minds, young Black South African minds, was Steve Biko. Steve Biko was a student, a college student, and he created what became known as the Black Conscious movement in South Africa in the late 60s. And he says Black consciousness is an attitude of the mind and a way of life, the most positive call to emanate from the Black world for a long time. And so a part of his actual tenets were, one, he was really concerned with the way that we get free first is we get free psychologically. And so we have to reclaim entrance into the society through our mind. And next, he really believed then we can come together and actually create some movement. A lot of his Black consciousness thought would be responsible for 1976 for the Soweto uprising, but then that will also be a hard hit. So just a little bit more about South Africa. So South Africa has a similar moment, particularly the sort of like liberation movements. And so the Freedom Charter was originally written in 1955 and is signed particularly by the ANC, the current government, which is the African National Congress, and several other parties at that time who were working on behalf of those who were not considered to be included a part of the government. And so it begins in a similar way we the people of South Africa declare all of our country and the world to know. And again, they had several tenets, and I'll just go through a couple of these. The first one is the people shall govern. The next one, all national groups shall have equal rights. The people shall share in the country's wealth. The land shall be shared among those who work it. All shall be equal before the law. All shall enjoy equal human rights. There shall be work and security. The doors of learning and of culture shall be open. There shall be houses, security, and comfort. There shall be peace and friendship. And of course, at the bottom it says, let all who love their people and their country now say, as we say here, these freedoms we will fight for side by side throughout our lives until we have won our liberty. And you can see some of the influence not only from Black America, but American documents of freedom, which kind of become the mode under which nations emerge. And South Africa, of course, will not get its independence, particularly as a full nation, until 1994, and we'll talk about that. But in 1968, we already have much of the continent of Africa having enjoyed its independence. And the main kind of characters pushing that forward, of course, being Ghana in 1957, and moving forward with their president Nkrumah, who really pushes for this neo-colonial life that is a move away from Europe. And so you have African scholars starting to ask these questions of, what can we do for ourselves as Africans? In the same way that Black Power is asking these questions, what can we do for ourselves as Black folks in the United States? Just to give a little history as we dive deeper into South Africa. So South Africa is interesting. One, of course, is at the bottom of the continent, but also it has an interesting colonial history. So first, it is quote unquote, first settled by the Dutch, and it's called the Cape Colony from 1652 to 1815. And then British colonization, and Cecil Rhodes, who we'll come back to and name, becomes one of the main guys of who is going through particularly the continent of Africa as a British explorer and colonizer. And so he essentially lives in Cape Town at the height of the time that he's alive, but he plans to, what the red is marking, to create, and he at some point settles in part all parts on the red. But the main thing he was trying to do that he never accomplished in his death, that he also killed hundreds of people doing, was to create a railroad that went from Cape Town to Cairo. And so that was one of his big projects. And then to think about it in this way, how this man thought, he thought of himself, his home being in Cape Town, but then he thought of what we now know as Zimbabwe, as Rhodesia, which was basically like, in some ways, he tried to make it a zoo where he imported animals, plants, food, people, and make it his backyard to his playground of living in Cape Town. And of course, his name is still very relevant in present day, as I have friends and know people who still have received the Rhodes Scholarship, which is still based on the amount of wealth he received in the 19th to early 20th century, just to think about how much he owned and how much of production influence he still has. And so when we think about South Africa as a governance, we have the Union of South Africa, which is British-led at this point, but they're trying to also agree with what's going on with Dutch folks in South Africa. So Dutch folks in South Africa are called Afrikaners, and those are folks who tend to have Dutch heritage, and British South Africans just refer to themselves as British South Africans usually. And so, but really the part in an interesting period that arises is we get a return back to Dutch control, and then this is the start of apartheid, 1948. One of the biggest moments is at the start of 1960, Sharpeville massacre. But really, let's get into a little bit more about what apartheid actually is. And so when we're thinking about what apartheid is interesting in the sense that it is one of the first sort of like legally written ways where race is defined by the state. And by the state, I mean the government. There are ways under which you could check someone's race, right? Like they had a definition for white, had a definition for Black, they had a definition for colored, which is different than colored and how we think about it in the United States. They had a definition for Indian, and they had tests for all these things, right? Like one big one was a pencil test. The Sharpeville massacre is important because people had to carry identification to move around. And so apartheid affected like every part of life in the same way that we think about Jim Crow in the United States. It has similar features. And essentially, though, it extends even further in some ways. And so the world doesn't necessarily always completely paying attention to these early areas. And so this is how we get these liberation parties. Particularly, this is how we get someone like Nelson Mandela blowing something up to try to kind of get not only attention within South Africa, but also the United States. And so this is where we get into another reemergence of like Pan-Africanism, as both the United Black America and Black Power movements are also in solidarity with what is happening on the continent this whole time. And so one of the bigger things is by the time we get to 1994, essentially it was a moment that we could kind of compare to civil rights era when we think about the enactment of acts. And so we have political emancipation. It's kind of what it's called. 1994 in South Africa is the first time that they have a democratic election. Democratic in this way, we mean everyone had the opportunity to vote, right? But also in the same breath, that was not the end. That was just the beginning. And so massacres continued in 2012, and we'll talk more about that and how this balance of a nation becoming through liberation, but then also fighting. So one of the bigger things is when we think about what happens when a liberation government goes from liberation government to movement party and running a nation. And so Mandela for Freedom, again, when we think about the ANC, there is a big shift in both. We have activists, we have folks who put their lives on the line. The amount of people who lost their lives in the struggle for both apartheid is quite high, in the way that the state was actually targeting them, and of course the 27 years that Mandela spent in prison. And so then 2019, we have the kind of like more, it's the way of the land when we think about South Africa. The current president, this is an older picture, but the current president is Cyril Ramaphosa, who's kind of standing to the right of Jacob Zuma, who was the president at the time, in the yellow blazer. And so they're filling arenas. The ANC is the chosen party. They lead the nation. But now I'm going to take a bit of like a personal turn and think about some other ways how we think about solidarity in multitudes. So in, well, I guess it was 2014, July 2014, my parents dropped me off at an airport and I went to study abroad at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And I would say it's a life-changing moment, and one of the reasons why I pursued getting a PhD. And so at that time, both in the United States, I was watching from afar Black Lives Matter and the rise of, and in response, particularly in Ferguson, in response to the death of Mike Brown, on Facebook, on YouTube, via like messages with friends. I was watching my friends do Lions at a different university while I'm somewhere else. And so it was an interesting split for me for a little bit. But at the same time, I was in South Africa, in Cape Town, at the University of Cape Town. And as you see in this top picture, is what happens the spring after I leave, because I was there the fall of 2014. So spring 2015, they begin this whole movement called Rhodes Must Fall. And so Rhodes Must Fall specifically looks at Cecil Rhodes, who we talked about a little bit, and the movement from not only statues, which we know there was a little bit of that in the United States as well, but then also what is the influence of the settler being on the edge of this campus. And so as you can see in this top picture, the mountain behind Table Mountain is a huge point. The land that the University of Cape Town sits on is quote unquote his land. And what we have a bit here is just students. And so I would actually have lunch and dinner sometimes sitting on the steps around this statue or behind it. And you could kind of hear the rumblings of this moment of people having this conversation of, this school is particularly now rising in a Black population. So why do we have all these white settlers still? And something interesting about his statue, as I zoomed in a little bit, as you can see, like he sits, he rests his cheek on his arm, and they called it the colonial gaze. So if you were to be looking behind the statue, it kind of looks like, quote unquote, Africa goes on forever, right? And that is the idea. And so that is why the statue set here. And these are all things that he like wrote up, particularly his will. And so they wanted this gone. And the way that this movement starts in March, actually I knew one of the young men who was really the initiator. And so when we talk about solidarity, how do we go from here? I'm not going to show you the picture, but this individual essentially goes to a porta potty and he throws feces onto the statue. And that began this sort of grander conversation that turns into something that you can still look up, hashtag Rhodes Must Fall. But also they ask another question that maybe some folks didn't think at that time in 2015 was important. But the question that Rhodes Must Fall says is, what do we have to do to continue to decolonize an African nation? And I think this is something about why I particularly use the language of political emancipation, as it's not necessarily always about what the paper says, what legal says, but how people are living. And so how people are living becomes an important part of this. So Rhodes Must Fall is 2015. This is also coinciding in the United States with the removal of Confederate statues as well. And then, of course, Rhodes Must Fall spreads everywhere because he doesn't just only have statues in South Africa, but I think they removed statues in the UK at Oxford. They removed statues in Egypt, and it takes off in that capacity. And that is actually what I wrote my senior thesis on, this comparison between the United States and South Africa. But then also at the same time, there's other things and other questions. And so which is why South Africa is a great example of global solidarity, because you'll see there's a variety of age groups, even in the images involved. And so one, they have this thing called Fees Must Fall that kind of like continues on. So you'll see that they get into a must fall kind of moment. And so essentially, I think it was that fall of 2015, you could imagine that spring of 2015, classes basically shut down. They do remove that statue. There's a lot of artistic and documentary things you can look up about that moment, but they continue on. They're in the movement of this. And so they have the Fees Must Fall movement. It's expensive to go to school, as it is expensive to go to school here. They don't believe that they should be taking on debt. And so they also are working with domestic workers as well, who are also like, this is hard for us to live in this society where we can't afford life. And so the two women on this side are also like, we can't even work at the school because the fees are so high and you're choosing to outsource work. And then of course, this question of 1976 is referencing the Soweto uprising. And so when we talk about time being repetitive and history repeating itself, like the movement never dies. Really, truly, we must continue it and continue the work. As you can see, though, in this capacity, Rhodes Must Fall was pretty much peaceful, and the school and the nation kind of got behind them. But the Fees Must Fall, not so much, because now you're talking about the government. And so they were attacked, people were arrested. Several of the folks I had interviewed for my thesis were arrested and just kind of taken in a way, similar way to apartheid, to these kind of far off places where they didn't live, and just put up, and then eventually just like randomly released in a town. And so they were coming directly at the government, particularly with the Fees Must Fall. And then next, it kind of got a little bit more violent, particularly from the school. And then of course the students reacted. But I remember particularly several of my friends who are South African, they didn't have anywhere to live, particularly when they went back to school. And so Max Price, written on the shack, was the president at the time. And so several of the students constructed a shack kind of like in the middle of campus here. And the shack, of course, is also representing how much of the Black population of South Africa lives in these shanty towns and these shacks. And so they put one up and students would actually sleep in there, take turns. There was just kind of like a sign-up sheet. So it was actually done both in protest, but also in necessity for the folks who didn't have anywhere to stay. Students were sleeping, I believe, like also in the gymnasium on cots. And it was just kind of like an unacceptable thing. And so essentially for a month, The police would come knock it down every day, and then they would come rebuild it up. And so this went on for a while. And then, of course, by I think the end, the students got fed up. And so what you see is kind of a continuation of the Rhodes Must Fall movement, and they burn essentially all of these documents and these sort of like settler documents and also portraits of like old white folks that were on the walls in some of these classrooms and buildings. And so one thing that we could take away from South Africa is that they've never stepped off the pedal, right? Even with the shift of government, like that wasn't enough. And so various versions of this movement continues on today, particularly in the must fall capacity. And so thinking about this, as I want us to also have time for a conversation as well, is thinking about the word Ubuntu from Desmond Tutu. And so he says Ubuntu is very difficult to render into a Western language. It speaks of the very essence of being human. You are generous, caring, and compassionate. You share what you have. It is to say, my humanity is inextricably bound up in yours. You belong in a bundle of life. And so oftentimes when we think of the word Ubuntu, we say something like, I am because you are. And so seeing that in the same way and extending that to my freedom is tied to yours is another way to speak of it. And lastly, I wanted to end with particularly some words from June Jordan. I won't read the whole part, but I'll read the last stanza. And so she wrote this poem for South African women to commemorate the women and children who in 1956 presented themselves in bodily protest against the Donbass and the capital of apartheid. And she presented this at the United Nations, August 9th, 1978. And at the end here, she says, and who will join the standing up? And the ones who stood without sweet company will sing and sing back into the mountains, and if necessary, even under the sea. And the part that I always hold on to when I'm in need of some inspiration is, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That was rich. I you you gave us a lot in 30 minutes, and I'm wondering, as you prepared for this
Yes.
and prayed about this and thought about this, what, if anything, kind of rose with you that you wanted us to feel with you?
Mm. Yeah, no. When I'm thinking about the journey of freedom, particularly, and togetherness, is that it does take all of us, right? And so I'm also in the period of like coming off of finishing up my book and then going back into the classroom. So I've been thinking a lot about like what are we to do together? And so we're kind of in this moment that I'm calling like in the meantime. And so some of it is really just about who am I willing to be with somebody else, and what am I willing to do? And this is not about agreement. I think sometimes we get stuck with like, I can only be in solidarity or work with others who completely agree with me. But if we believe is freedom is an endless pursuit in the way of Angela Davis actually speaking, then some of the feeling we have is we have to develop a politics of care. And we have to understand that both violence, disagreement, and movement forward really takes place when we choose to give a little bit of ourselves even more to a moment. And so really understanding that, like, to really be a part of the freedom forward is I gotta probably give up a little bit of myself in a way that might not, it's not comfortable. The pursuit of freedom is not comfortable. And it's not easy. And so really considering some of those things, particularly in a South African context where they're doing this over and over and over again. And in a lot of ways, life is harder post-apartheid, right? Because one of the bigger things that happens in South Africa is they have this saying that, they gave us the crown, but they took the jewels. And
Ah,
so like livelihoods and economic livelihoods are not easier because it's a Black country. It's actually somewhat harder. And so it's really something to see that they're still moving forward in this motion. And so sometimes when we decide that we can't be in solidarity with folks because we don't agree with them. So like, you know, I always tell my students, like solidarity is more like a train, I would say. And so let's say we're going for something for the sky and the mission is the sky is blue, but you think it's purple. But hey, just get on the train for now. You can hop off when you feel like we fought enough for the sky to be purple. Like we have to, but keep going. Like don't
We
not
on a train, if we
we're
even
on the
on a train
train.
right now. Some of
Yeah,
us are on foot, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We got to get on the train together. Yeah.
I I've been to the District 6 Museum and had the visceral reaction to just a change in the law. And
Yeah.
ever since we've started having these executive orders and the new organization of the government in the United States, I keep thinking about how easy it would be by
Yes.
one executive order, to go back to a white, colored, black situation.
Right.
We've already had so many changes to the passport and with the dangers that we have with the midterms coming up. I
Yes.
wonder if an executive order came down, knowing what you know about movements,
Hmm.
what's your best advice for us? How do we move?
Yeah. Yeah. No. Uh, yes. Knowing what I know about movements, find the people you love and find some other people who are willing to speak loudly. And one, we start providing your skills to how we survive, right? The first thing about solidarity is survival. And so all of us need each other to survive. We all have skills based on that. And so yes, we are literally one law away from Jim Crow being fully enacted. In a lot of ways, it already is here. And so we're not going to pretend like that's not true either. But we're like one way between that being like black, white, everyone else bathroom situation again, right? And so because we know that, we have to go back to some of the ways that has sustained black life everywhere, which is each other. And so some of those practices that maybe we see as old school or like my grandma did is actually the things that we might need to start doing. Like, so somebody did hair, somebody cooked food, somebody did the teaching. Like some of these things are important. So we have to go back to creating the systems of survival that push us forward. That is the first step, particularly of movement life, right? And then the other part is like
Survival.
how, yeah. And then the
Okay.
other part is like, how do I participate, particularly in the movement against the state? Like we're gonna have to make a move against in a national front type of way again. And so yes, I believe in voting, I believe in doing that, but that is just one piece of our mode of movement life. Also, we're going to need some people who write some things again. We're going to need some people who speak. One of my advisors says, yes, march, but we're also going to need another innovation. Like marching worked because it was an innovation of that
That's right.
time. And so we needed like another protest innovation to kind of like catch them off guard. Like they've watched all Eyes on the Prize just as we watched Eyes on the Prize. Like they know sort of like the handbook of civil rights movement, Black Power life. So we'll have to continue to make some innovation in terms of like what our state front and national fronts look like. But we have to be prepared and willing to put in the time. You know, one of the things that so my book is actually about the civil rights era, and particularly in Albany, Georgia. But like they spent 3 years night after night gathering in churches on pews. And so one of the things that where I think the church is important is it might not be the biggest black space, but it can become a space where you're speaking like if it has that feeling. And so there's something about that spiritual feeling that when it's combined with the political means that we're willing to sacrifice and put ourselves and push ourselves into being a greater being. And so one, figure out what you're willing to do to survive. I always say when you're like, maybe that's not my style, I could lose something, ask yourself, what does freedom feel like? And what am I willing to do to get there?
Mercy. A word, a word. Dr. DuPont Walker, I see your hand. Was that just a praise hand? You have lots
No,
of.
no, no, there was a praise hand, but I was
Mhm.
actually wanting to jump in. Thank you, Bishop. And thank you so much, Dr. Clapman. So much of what you said just opens up a rich, rich, rich dialogue. And I hope there's an opportunity for us to talk about how we translate what you experience, what you studied, what you researched with the message to us today. But my question is tied to the 90 million voters who chose not to vote in 2024.
Mhm.
And I believe the figure is about 30 million of those being us.
Yes.
And what we can do to bond together, the ways you're talking about coming together for survival, is there any lesson in that for us to come together for survival at the polls
Yeah.
by voting? Because it's so critical. And we know that we don't live in the same neighborhoods. We don't go to the same laundromats anymore. We're all over the place. How can we, the AME Church, get that done?
Yes.
And
First, I
friends.
recognize that Dr. Dupont Walker was very much present while I was getting my PhD at USC and attended church close by. So it's good to see you again. And so when we think about what the AME Church can do, and I do believe that the biggest thing is to focus on, I know a lot of the rhetoric has been focusing on like, we need to convince folks who voted for Trump to move back across. I don't think that we need to do that, as more people didn't vote, right? And we know 30 million of those were Black folks. And a large part of those were young Black folks, particularly. And so I do think some of that is, how do we get in touch with younger folks and understand their concerns? A lot of the things that when I talk to younger people, why they are not politically involved per se in their communities or environment, is they don't feel like there's a space for them. Right. And so a lot of it is just like, what can I do to get them to show up? So I've been working here in Winston-Salem to try to assist with some of the things. And so like we've hosted sort of like DJ block parties. Food is a good way to get anyone to show up. Music and food is a grand way to get people to come outside. And then when they're there, don't do too heavy. This is not a pushback on for them for not doing anything. But I do like my intro question is, what does freedom look like to you, right? Like when we're trying to get there, and like, what does it feel like? What does it sound like? And usually people find that less aggressive than me being like, you should vote, right? Like that isn't necessarily the point of that. And so when we think about the churches being a part of the community, like go to all the things as members of your church and represent your church. Go back to the people sitting at the meetings for county, local, go sit in those, go to other openings of things and sit there, go to businesses. And so really being intentional about creating the ecosystem of survival is the first part, right? Because I think some of that, like just personal things, not only has been lost over time, but then if we take the pandemic into hand, it was just a straight cut, right? For a lot of folks. And so they got lost. And we really have to go really touch and agree. And I think that's the thing that the AME Church does well, touch and agree. Like it's not only historical, but present day. Like everywhere I've lived in the United States, even when I was in South Africa, Bishop Daniels was there. And I just got in the car with him one weekend and I ended up somewhere, right? And so just like knowing that the AME Church takes care of people everywhere. And so really doing that though, you have to actually like put ourselves in that position. And it does take vulnerability, and people are gonna say some crazy things to you, like go out and canvassing. I really like my dad used to do with the church. We would walk around Lithonia, knocking on doors and praying, if that's your way forward. And like just not only talking about the church, but also talking about some of the community things that you can get done. So there's ways to do it. People will close doors. You may get cursed out, but I do think sometimes they'll remember you, because depending on where you live, it's that small of a town. And so people whose doors I've knocked on have been like, you were really telling me that you were a professor. And that was true. I was like, hopefully I didn't lie about that. But, like they did their research afterwards. And the next thing you know, now we're at a meeting together. And so inviting people into spaces that they don't think they're allowed. And I think that's the other thing when we talk about the disconnect in the Black community with American politics. Like there's this idea that it's not for me, it's not working on my behalf. And the reality is it never has. It never has. There's nothing about American political life that has worked on behalf of Black politics. However, Black political life is the reason why American politics works. And I know that's kind of a push, but we've pushed American freedom into reality over and over again. And so it's really just getting people to understand that we need you to do it too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My. I think I heard the word go several times. So I think that's the answer with reaching people is involves going not just inviting people to come. Inviting people into places where they don't feel they're welcome is one thing, but going to meet people where they are so that they can see your face and hear your voice and look you up and be like, Pastor, look at that, you came to my house.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us this evening. People are desperately wanting you to say the name of your book again so
Oh,
that they
yes.
can hear it. If you would share that. And then
Yeah.
I'm going to warn you thanked your parents several times.
Yes.
And I want to thank them too. They've clearly done a great job. I wanted to just ask if your mom would be willing to close us in prayer when we get ready to close out here.
Okay.
All
Yeah,
right.
so my what I'm working on, and I have sent off to some academic editors. So looking out for this to come out in the next 2 years. My book is Hum So the Devil Don't Hear You, Rule Black Southern Existences as the Otherwise, which takes a look into the Albany movement as a sonic moment and thinking about democratic life and American life in a sonic way, and how particularly those rural Black murmurs, mumbles, and hums that we heard and learned are some of the ways of collectivity and power. And so that's what I write about, and that's what I believe in. And I believe Black freedom has a sound, and it sounds like us.
Yes.
And that's what I write about. Yeah.
Oh my God, this is just so divine. I've been saying this for years. There is a certain sound. It is a sound of freedom, and we make it from the inside, and there is going to be a combined sound that comes. I can't wait to engage with this book. Thank you so much for this presentation. Uh, Mother Crawford, would you close us in prayer?
Hey, Bishop, of course, I'm going to bow to the pastor. He's on. Reverend Dr. Marvin L. Crawford. Thank you so much, though. And thank you for all of the people that supported Claire over the years from all the different places. We are truly a connection church, and I'm grateful for all of you. Thank you so much. Reverend Dr. Marvin.
All right, she disobeys the bishop to obey the pastor, but it's a family affair, so I'm not getting involved. Go right ahead, sir.
We live together.
I
Okay?
got it. Go right ahead, sir. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here.
But I'm going to flex back because I hear myself pray all the time, and she does too. I want to hear you pray. Thank you, sweetie. Go ahead.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let us close in prayer as we thank God for this moment in time we've all spent together. Gracious God, we are so glad that we've gathered here on this platform to worship you in a different kind of way with our AME Church Freedom School. We thank you for Claire, Dr. Claire Crawford, who has spent so many hours, so much time studying the subject that you have given to her and given her the knowledge to do things with. We're grateful for her. We're grateful for her knowledge. We pray that you guide and strengthen her as she moves forward in this space of time while we're yet here on this earth. We also ask a special blessing for all of us as we do your work on earth as well. Give us the strength, give us the courage, give us the direction. Teach us about solidarity. Let us know that it is bigger than us and keep us focused on you. For all things work together for good for those that are called according to his purpose. We're grateful for this commission. We're grateful for the leadership of those that thought it not robbery to pull us together for a freedom school. Let there be freedom for all people. Let there be freedom for those of us of color that feel misused, misplaced, and often disenfranchised. Give us the knowledge that you made us all equal, and we will continue to serve and be great, for great is your faithfulness. Give us grace, God, as we depart from this place. Bless each family gathered here. And as we gather again next week, talking about freedom, help us inch closer and closer so we may see it yet in our lifetimes. We believe you. We exalt you. We believe you. We trust you. And it's in the precious name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen.
And amen. God bless you. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Crawford. Thank you all. Don't forget, this is recorded so that you can share it in your communities. If you heard something that you're like, people need to hear this, please make sure you're the vehicle that helps them hear it. Thank you again for your participation. Updates are always on our amefreedomsummer.com site. God bless you and good night or morning, depending on where you are.